Ooh, I'm on. Oh, man, that's hot. Let me see it. Yep. All right, you should be good now. I got too many things in my hand. Good morning. As you can tell already, we're going to be a little different this morning.
Ahora que se puede ver que vamos a hacer las cosas diferentes hoy.
That's just one part of the different.
Es una parte de la diferencia.
Steve Teal is joining us this morning from Baxter Institute in Honduras. Most of you are familiar with that. I know some of you might not be, and you're going to be in for a treat. You're going to learn a lot about that, about what they do and their mission, both in the worship hour as Steve's going to be delivering our message, and then I hope you'll hang around for the Los Damas luncheon because you'll learn a lot more there. Baxter is one of the big four, I call them. We have 4 major missions that we support in this church. Baxter is one, Eastern European Mission is another, the KFC is another, and then the prison ministry. And then we have some other smaller ones here and there, but those are, like I say, what I call the big 4. This summer, I was blessed during our mission trip to be able to sneak off from the actual manual labor and go and visit with Steve and Diana at Baxter, and they were, of course, very gracious hosts and gave us the grand tour. And I was amazed. If you've never done that, I was telling them I've always heard about Baxter and preaching school. It's a preaching school. It's a preaching school. Well, I've been to preaching schools before, so I didn't see a big deal. But then you get there, and it is so much more than that. And just really amazing. And that's not what we're going to talk about right now, so I don't want to, I'm rabbit trailing. However, I did want to set the stage a little bit. Now, while we were there, Steve, of course, blindsided me and said, I'm going to let you teach in my class this morning, and we're just going to let them ask you questions. So I'm returning the favor. No, we're not blindsiding him. I prepped him a little bit. I'm going to let Steve tell you a little bit of introduction instead of doing, I know I just did an introduction, but not really an introduction about him personally. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your previous experience in ministry and mission. I mean, you haven't always been a seminary president, so tell us a little bit about your journey.
Are we on?
It should be on. Yep.
Okay, we're on. We were buddies at Freed-Hardeman College. It was a college then, it wasn't a university. And so Glenn and I decided, he's our roommate, let's go out and preach at this little country congregation out in the cotton fields of West Tennessee. And so there were like 25 in this congregation, and we started going out there, and then all of a sudden, it seemed like overnight, we had 50 college students going with us out to this small country congregation out there. And so we were working together, leading, singing, doing the preaching, and those kinds of things. And then we brought the outhouse in-house. We did a construction project on this little church, doing things together. And, in that kind of working together, being together, things happen and God moves. And so we formed a mission team. A mission team of 5, well, actually it's probably 7 families originally, but in time it was reduced down to 5 families. We were there doing undergraduate work, went to Harding, and then went to Harding Graduate School, and then after a couple of master's degrees and about a 4 or 5 year period, raising funds, we go to Argentina in 1980. That was quite an adventure, going as a team together, and that's one of the reasons why we were pulled to Baxter, because we're producing a mission team a year. They go through Baxter, which is a 4-year school, develop really tight relationships, and they have this strong desire to do evangelism, and they go as teams. That's not the only way to do mission work, certainly. And a lot of people have done it differently. And that's all right. Paul did both. He went as a team, and sometimes he was solo out there in his missionary journeys. But he generally had somebody with him when he was doing his ministry and his mission work. So we are in Buenos Aires for 15 years, established 3 congregations in that huge city of 15 million people, and then came back to the States, ministered in Louisiana. That was like coming back to the mission field. Anybody from Louisiana? Anybody from Louisiana? All right, where?
Bogalusa. Bogalusa.
Bogalusa, okay. I don't know Bogalusa. We know quite a few places. Our son played soccer, and so they would travel everywhere to play soccer. Okay, all right, good. We were up in Monroe, northeast corner. Up there, a lot of cotton fields up there in northeast Louisiana. And then did that for 11 years, then went to North Carolina. Please pray for North Carolina. In a 50-mile radius of our home there in North Carolina, it is disaster. It's just incredibly bad. And communities along any kind of river or creek were just wiped out. Some disappeared, just totally disappeared, these communities. And it's set the area back, I don't know, 20 years. It'll be quite a bit of time in rebuilding there. The congregation I left in North Carolina to go to Baxter is doing relief, and I can give you information on how you can contact them if you have interest in helping through a church there, Church of Christ there in North Carolina. So we were there for 6.5 years, and then we go to Baxter. Been there 12 years. So I was preaching for a Hispanic church last Sunday in Memphis, just outside of Memphis, actually South Haven. And the preacher there is a Baxter graduate in that Hispanic church. And I was looking at all the individuals in that church. I said, who in here is a foreigner? Well, who in here is not a foreigner? They all are. And I said, I know what it's like to be a foreigner. I've been 27 years as a foreigner in Latin America. And they treat you different when you're a foreigner. They just really do. And I'm praying for you because this is tough. This is tough. A guy can get you through the difficult times you have. And so that's a little bit of background of.
That's good. No, I appreciate that. That sets the stage. One of the reasons that we decided to do this with Steve being here, it actually came up in an elders meeting. They were asking me whether Steve was going to preach or do class, and I usually say I don't care, whatever he wants to do. The suggestion was made, well, you've been talking about the Holy Spirit, and we've talked about how the Spirit works differently, or we see different movements of the Spirit on the mission field. Somebody with as vast a history of experience in missions as Steve would be better able to comment on that than some of us who have never, done that as a long-term career. And so, as we've been talking about the Holy Spirit, we have talked about how it is different on the front lines than it is at home. And one of the metaphors or illustrations that we use is the difference between a soldier on the front line and a soldier that's guarding the fort. They're both warriors in the same force, but their needs, their weapons, their tactics are going to be very different. And so what we see sometimes in North America in established church, the Bible Belt, is going to look a little bit different than it might in places where the gospel is traveling for the first time. And so I've asked Steve, how have you experienced this on the mission field, and how have you experienced the different ways of the working of the Holy Spirit on the mission field, and as you're engaging in those front lines, and if he has any examples that he would share with us from his experience?
I've used the term we were establishing a beachhead. That's a military kind of a thing. We go to Buenos Aires, and 15 million people, and very, 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 very few churches in that area. And so we were going to new areas where no one had ever worked and starting congregations, that kind of a thing. One night, I get out of the car, and I've got a Bible study. I've had 3 Bible studies in this one neighborhood, and I'm going to one home, and it started pouring down raining. I pull out my umbrella, but that doesn't keep the mud off my feet. So I'm just trudging through this, and we've been in the mission field a while, and it's been a challenge working and studying with these people in this one neighborhood. And I don't know, I felt really alone out there by myself, trudging through the mud. And, I said, what am I doing here? What difference can I make in a city of 15 million people, studying with a few people in this one neighborhood? I just, I really felt alone. And I attribute it to the Spirit inspiring song. So here I'm trudging through the mud and really down in the dumps and wondering what was this all about. And I started singing songs, hymns, praise to God. And all of a sudden I just lifted above the rain and above the clouds and had another perspective, because I was doing this for Him. Not for me, but for Him. And that I encourage you to do that. Sing songs. Sing songs, hymns, when you're in those situations where, wow, how am I going to make it through this? But allow the Spirit to guide you to do that kind of a thing as you go through life. And life's tough challenges. Life is very unjust as we experience it here in this earth. Okay, let me contrast. We go to Guatemala, and we're part of a language school before we go to Argentina. Okay, timeline 1980. We arrive in Guatemala in January of 1980, the 9th of January, and we're working in a language school where we don't know any Spanish, and they put us in a home of someone who doesn't know any Spanish, any English, no English. So it's called immersion. So you're put into a situation, and sink or swim, you learn the language. It is a very good way to learn language. You're learning it like, basically you have to become a 4-year-old and just repeat everything you hear Mama and Daddy say. And so that was it. We were on the streets repeating everything that our language teachers, and they were college students who just gave us a line to repeat all day long. So I go to the city park, and there are the shoe shine guys out there, and I give them a quarter. And they go, wow, a quarter. All right, but you got to listen to me talk and help me read a passage from the Bible. And so that was my trick about helping get some language under my belt. So, but I'm with this language teacher, college student, university student, and he's taking me out to see things around Quetzaltenango. Shela is the name of the community. And it's Mayan. Guatemala is very Mayan. And so we're going into Zunil, and we pass the community washateria, which it was, kind of like a pool, a spring there, and they were washing their clothes on the side of the street at this pool kind of a thing. And then we get off the bus, and we walk. And I'm going to show you something he says. But again, I'm barely understanding anything he's saying. And we go to this, it looks like just a normal house, and we open the door, and all of a sudden there was a smell of candles, lots of candles burning. And it was packed, this place. I mean, there's like 100+ people in there, packed all in there together. and I can't tell what's going on. Something is going on in the corner of the room. So, I'm going to get over to see what's going on in the corner of the room. And so I weave my way through the people, through the crowd, and get over there. And there's this guy seated in a chair, and another man who is giving a cigarette to him, putting it in his mouth. And then he would take alcohol and pour it down his throat. His name, San Simon, Saint Simon. This is the worship of Saint Simon. It is the merger of Christianity and paganism. Christopaganism is what it's called. And so it wasn't Christianity, it wasn't paganism, but it was more paganism than Christianity. They were lighting candles, putting them down in front of him, and expecting him to do a miracle for them. And then worshiping him, and it was a mannequin, right? It was a mannequin, actually, that they were worshiping. And I saw the flip of the Holy Spirit, the dark spirit world that exists. There are a lot more pagans than there are Christians in our world. Today, there are a lot more. You think of India, and you think of all the Hindus out there, they're pagans.
Right.
And their worship of many, many gods. And we could go to Japan, which is a very advanced country, but it's Shinto religion, and they worship their ancestors. They don't worship Jesus Christ and don't know the God that we have. And so that was an experience that it took me a long time to process that. Seeing people who were very much unlike North Americans in one respect. We worship other kinds of gods here. We do. But so committed to this and so drawn to believe that there was some power there. And there is power. The dark side has power.
We have, before we entered into the study of the Holy Spirit, we did a study on angels and demons and spiritual beings, and we talked about a lot of that, and that was one of the things that as we move into this, one of the things that I wanted you to address, and I appreciate you doing that, because we just also, this was what we've been talking about with 1 Corinthians. We just went through 12 through 14 of 1 Corinthians, and one of the things that we noticed there was that a lot of the practices that they were doing were carryovers from the pagan mystery cults, and it was very much like what Steve is describing. I want you guys to be thinking about this, because in just a second we're going to open up the floor for questions, and so we like to have a little bit of give and take in here on Sunday morning, and so I'm putting that in your head so you can be aware of that and you're not just napping. But just kidding. But we also we did talk about spiritual beings, angels, demons, and how those spiritual beings accept worship as gods. And I think we see the Spirit working differently in based on culture, based on settings, based on the spiritual climate of the area. And that's some of what he was just addressing. That was actually our next question, but you've done it, so I don't. I'm not going to go back to that. But once again, as you're on the mission field and you're in those pagan cultures, specifically as you're. I mean, even now, you were referencing the students that sometimes, are coming from those cultures. How do you see the carryover as people bring in their baggage from other faith backgrounds, or do you still see that? I know you just kind of addressed that in St. Simone, but so I won't belabor that point. But
it's a spiritual warfare, whether you're here or if you're on the mission field. It appears as though our life experiences is it intensifies when you go into the mission field because we're in His territory.
Absolutely.
And now you've done biblical studies, and you notice in the Old Testament, as you approach the end of the Old Testament, there's not a lot of conversation about spirits and those kinds of things, demons and that kind of thing. You get to Jesus, what happens? Bang! They're everywhere. But they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Satan's out to bring Jesus down. And he does it first in the temptation. He directly confronts him face to face. Wow, what would that be like? But he does that, but he's sending them. You know, he's the evil spirit in the synagogue. That first venture out in Mark chapter 1, he's got this spirit trying to disturb everybody and upset Jesus, and Jesus calls his name and he delivers him. But that was the first of so many other instances where the devil was coming after Jesus. It's a spiritual battle for him. God's presence in the form of Jesus, his son, Satan came after him. And so when we step into the dark world, all kinds of manifestations of Satan will come at us. Evil will come at us. My son, he was born in Argentina, our son, and Jonathan, he's a typical third culture kid. Third culture kids. He grew up in Argentina into a young teen, and then he comes to the States. The third culture kids have a hard time finding themselves. And so he goes through Harding grad school, and then gets 2 master's degree at the grad school. And then he goes into nursing. But now he is a managing nurse or over nurses in the Arizona State Detention Center. 3,500 inmates. And he says, I hear words I never knew existed. Life is cheap. They will swallow razor blades. They will try to hang themselves. Their own life they don't value in that setting. It's another kind of world, dark world that he's in, that we pray for him every day that he'll survive that situation. He knows Spanish. He grew up in Argentina, and so the Hispanics, there's a lot of them in that detention center. They would talk in Spanish and think he didn't know a word they were saying. They quickly figured out he knew everything they were saying, and so they've nicknamed him the White Mexican. He's as white as us, Diane and I, and so that's it. But it's a spiritual battle, and when you go into those kinds of areas in our world, you will confront that, and you'll confront the evil side, and you will have to depend on the Spirit guiding you and helping you to say things. Where did that come from? You know, that you never could have imagined you could come up with, but God guides you in those really, really difficult times.
You brought a clip with you this morning.
Yeah.
For the class section, and I'm going to let you set that up. And then after this clip, we're going to open up the floor for questions for the last 15 minutes or so. If you'll raise your hand, Jacob and I are going to be walking around with microphones so that Steve can hear you better, and because I don't always do a good job of restating. And so we're going to move as fast as we can. Be patient with us. But I'm going to let you set up that clip, and then we'll open up the floor for questions.
This is just a simple clip of giving you an idea of what the students look like. You were in the classes and you interacted personally with the students. The students come to us from all over Latin America. We presently have 11 different nations represented in our student body, but that could be Ronnie is doing a great deal, our admissions director, and we're going to go to 80 students, so we will have some other nations in there. Many of them are first-generation Christians, but then also we have father-son. We have a number of sons of fathers who came through Baxter 25 years ago, and that's a lot of fun to see that happening. We've got two pairs like that, no, three pairs of that, father-son, the sons now at Baxter right presently. So, but anyway, you see the students. We have 2/3 married and 1/3 singles. Average age is around 26, 27. So it's not your university, Sam Houston, 18, 19-year-old entering the university. Our average age is much older, and they come, if they're married, they come with kids. They almost always have kids, or we've got some pregnant girls on campus who did not have kids, but and they come with work experience and oftentimes university studies. So we're just going to be looking at students in the classroom and then in chapel. Yeah, this is the classroom. That's a Cuban. That's a Peruvian. Great singer. That's a Mexican. She's a Guatemalan. This is in our chapel area for chapel. That's a North American. And that's a Costa Rican who's the oldest. That one fellow was 65. That's two Nicaraguans, a couple. He's a Nicaraguan. This is chapel. That's a Mexican couple. He's a Nicaraguan. Speaks really good English. Some of you know him. This is our dean, Lupe Mayo. Lupe has a wonderful story. I think I've told you his story. He's a African American from Dominican Republic. And again, this is a Mexican who's our dean on campus.
One of the things that impressed me the most, Steve let me sit in on one of his classes and field some questions and talk to the students. And just a few months before, I had been able to talk to some undergrad students at Pepperdine, and the difference in questions. And I'm not trying to diminish. Obviously, they were 18, 19-year-old undergrads versus grown adults. But the depth of the questions from Steve's students was so much more than the level of questions from some of the Pepperdine students. And so I was very, very impressed with the students and with everything. We're going to open the floor up for questions. And so Jacob's going to be on this side of the room. I'm going to be on this side of the room. And we have a microphone, and that will hand you, and you're going to have to speak directly into it for it to catch you. But we'll open the floor and let Jason start.
I really appreciate your coming, Jeff. And what I like to do is someone who has experience to talk with our students. That's a real life experience. You've been in ministry a while. Mm-hmm. And so they're not there yet, and so that gives them perspective. We've had elders down, and they have done classes on leadership. How do you intentionally create elderships, that kind of a thing? And it's very valuable for them to then talk with someone who's been there and done that. And thank you for coming.
Oh, it was a blessing for me. I was more nervous speaking in your chapel than I was at Pepperdine. Go ahead, Jason.
So I have a two-part question. Going back to you said that Guatemala is very Mayan, and back when I was a kid, and I don't remember which grade, but I did a book report on the Mayans and the ancient temples and the Incas and all that stuff. So I was wondering if you had ever got to visit any of the ancient temples. And then my second part is, are Mayans, or are they Christians?
We were
You're
we
right.
were in it's a ruined setting in Guatemala, and it's just kind of they were trying to rebuild this city, this area, and there was a temple area, and so we were taken back around, and there was one area back there. There was smoke rising, and so there was some active, even today, 20th century, 21st century people worshiping there. So we go to Copan, which is just out north of Tegucigalpa. It's 7 hours to get there because of the roads. But we go up there. We like to take North Americans up to there because Copan is a city that existed for 1,000 years, a Mayan city. And you go into the very middle of that city. They have this turtle, huge turtle, back of a turtle. And they have a little carved out area down the back of this thing. And that's where they would, on the top of it, the very top of this kind of scooped out area, they'd put the virgin's head on it. They would always go for virgins. Go figure. And they would chop off their head, and the blood would run down the turtle, and there would be this recipient down at the bottom to collect the blood. Their blood was considered sacred, and they were giving their lives to their gods. You know, you see in National Geographic and other programmings, how is it that the foreigners, the North Americans, the Europeans came in and destroyed the cultures of many places. And I'm wondering how I would have felt if I had walked in to that setting and saw them sacrificing hundreds of virgins, women, and not do something, you know. And so there was a reaction, obviously, among the Europeans as they came in and witnessed this carnage, this incredibly unthinkable thing, religious thing, as an act of worship to their gods, as they would sacrifice humans in that altar. Go to the other side of it. The Guatemalan church is fantastic. It is growing by leaps and bounds. And you have, I sent up our chorus to sing in their annual Easter week lectureship they have. And we were at that lectureship in 1980, and there were 500 for it. The students just last year went up for it, and there were 4,500 for it. So the church is growing great in Guatemala. They have churches of 500 and have elders, and they aren't dependent upon the U.S. There is something about the Guatemalan culture that is very, very favorable to Christianity. And you know, we like the Guatemalans that come to Baxter's. Again, we get all these different cultures, and we have Guatemalans on campus. But there is a cultural trait about the Guatemalans that we like. We call them the noble ones. Very respectful, the Guatemalans. Great question.
Anybody else? If you have a question, up to you.
Good morning. I'm right here. We've been, like Jeff said, we've been talking about the spiritual world for a long time in Sunday morning class, and we've talked about how in the United States especially, a lot of people are not open to the spiritual world. They're not super familiar or uncomfortable, I guess. And I know that in a lot of Latin cultures, they are more open to the spiritual world, spiritual presence. And my question is, is it easier to talk about God or to share the gospel with someone that already has an understanding of the spiritual world, or are there additional challenges?
I would agree with you that the Hispanic is more inclined to the Spirit and the spiritual world, and conversations and Bible studies, especially it depends on the region. There are more receptive regions in Latin America than other. We were in Argentina, and it was 1 year studying every week with a person before they would finally make a commitment to Jesus. And a lot of it was out of their European background. They're either Italian or they're Spaniards, and they're very Catholic, but not really in practice. They just are traditional, and they don't want to leave that. And so that was very difficult there in that region. But as you move up into the continent of South America, the Brazilians are very open to the gospel. There's a variety of religions in Brazil, and some of them are carryovers. They were a lot of slaves brought into Brazil, just like they were brought into the States. But actually, more slaves were transported to Brazil than to the States. And so a lot of those religions of Africa can be found, a variety of them in Brazil. But the people at large are more receptive in Brazil. You move up, Venezuela was the star of the Churches of Christ. It's kind of like Ukraine, the star of the Churches of Christ, and then war hit it. Communism has hit Venezuela, and over 10th, probably more like 15% of its population is left because the recent presidents are taking it very left, very communist, very Cuba kind of a thing. Central America is wide open. You can door knock there, which I did when I was a teenager in the States. Went door knocking, and on campaign efforts. I remember doing that in Tallahassee, Florida, and a big campaign rally and that kind of a thing. And we'd go door knocking and try to set up Bible. Jewel Miller film strips. You might remember those. Yeah. Well, it worked in 1968, 69 in Tallahassee, Florida. But they're very receptive there to talking faith and religion. Commitment is another thing. And so you can lead them to a decision to be baptized. But I tell my students, slow down. I say, be sure they know who they're giving their life to when they are baptized into Christ. So, that is the more challenging thing for that area as far as the gospel.
I think we have, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were done.
No.
Okay, I apologize.
No.
I think we have another question on this side.
Can you explain a little bit about Cuba and the problems that they're having trouble in Cuba?
Well, communism has raped the country theologically, religiously, and economically. And it's really sad what that government has done to that country. And it is incredible that they are surviving as a people and that they've not rebelled. That there have been glimpses, there's been moments, but you know what immediately happens after anybody protests? They all disappear, literally disappear. We have Cuban students that come to Baxter, that study at Baxter 4 years, and then they go back as mission teams. And so we sent a team in 2015. They did not have a visitor to church for 3 years. For 3 years. Bless their hearts. They hung in there. And a neighbor boy came to a VBS, and then his grandma, and then the family, and it changed. And Gwyneth. Then a second mission team went. It was 6 months or more, and they were into studies, and they've had baptisms, and they have grown well. And then this last one, that was 2017, 18, when that second mission team, and then just 2 years ago, another mission team of 3 families went in there into another location. These are different cities in Cuba, and they have had close to 100 baptisms. And it's just been exciting to watch that happen, because that's not supposed to happen in Cuba. It's very secular, the country. Morality is, they're flippant about mores, Christian mores, and people jump in and out of marriages and that kind of a thing because of that secular, atheistic concept behind communism. But this church is just busting at the seams. Now, literally busting at the seams, because you can't build a church building. You have your church in your home. They won't allow you to build a church building, but they get the biggest house they can find and and fill it. And literally, this church's third mission team is having great response, wonderful response. So on one hand, the country is in, we see them rushing through Honduras. Rushing through Honduras. Them, along with the Nicaraguans, along with Venezuelans, and along with others from South America, they're coming in large numbers through Honduras. And I was down preaching at a congregation where we have some Baxter graduates close to the Nicaraguan border, which is to kind of the southeast, I guess maybe. It's an isthmus that kind of winds around Central America. But anyway, there was a bunch of buses, must have been 20 buses, school buses, yellow school buses. I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I ask, they're waiting. They're waiting on the immigrants to fill up the buses, and they'll drive them to the Guatemalan border. And the same thing happens at the Guatemalan border. There are more buses waiting up there. People get off the buses, cross the border, and they get in those buses and go up to Mexico. And then there again, it repeats itself through the long trek, which is Mexico. But right now, the Cubans can fly to Nicaragua without a visa, and then they begin the trek north to the U.S.
Steve, we appreciate you. I think we're out of time. I know there are probably more questions, and he will be around not just in the worship hour, but afterwards in our Los Damas luncheon, and you will have ample opportunity to ask those questions there. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Steve and Diana, for being with us today. Thanks, Steve, for opening up and sharing a little bit. This is a little bit weird to be put on the hot seat, and so we definitely appreciate you being a good sport about that. You got about 15 minutes. I want you to shake some hands, hug a neck, take care of your business. We'll be back in here at 10 o'clock to worship. Thank you.